Hi, everybody. You've probably heard of Answers in Genesis, the young Earth creationism cult that deludes people into believing that evolution is false and that the Earth is only 6,000 years old. Well, I've been spending a bit of time there recently, and the I don't think many people take the likes of Ken Ham seriously, not serious thinkers. People who already want to believe this stuff are quite happy to go along with what he says. But anybody who's got any semblance of education or knowledge of these subjects wouldn't fall for anything that Ken Ham says in a moment. But they do have a guy I encountered called Nathanial Jeanson, who's the new sort of poster boy for Answers in Genesis. He went to Harvard, seems to have wasted his degree there on ignoring all of the science books available to him and writing some really dubious hypotheses that he's later had published into books. And he's also married into the Ken Ham family, I understand. So I'm doing this video because he he critiqued one of my articles, but he didn't have the courage to debate me. He did that Weasley thing that young Earth creationists do. He cherry picked the bits he wanted to reply to, and he made a video. And then when I offered to debate him properly live, he bottled out. And but I think he's probably worth responding to in this video because he is, I think, able to really fool people, and he's got this sort of pseudo-scientific method which makes him sound like he knows what he's talking about. And a lot of people, particularly in the American Bible Belt and people in that sort of huckster culture, they don't really know any different. So he's able to persuade them with his distortions and his manipulations and make himself sound like an expert. There's an old saying, which I didn't invent, but it's something along the lines of, if you make something idiot-proof, then along comes a better idiot. And I think that's kind of what's happened with Answers in Genesis now. I mean, Ken Ham has been largely ridiculed and marginalized by any intellectual community worth their salt. But this guy, Nathaniel Jeanson, he seems to have taken it to another sort of idiot-proof level of, well, he's the credible voice now. He's as I said, the poster child for Answers in Genesis, and he's written a book called Traced, which I perused on a PDF format online. It wasn't all the book, and I just couldn't give myself the time to read through this nonsense. But every time I see what he's doing, he's got thousands of followers, and they seem to love what he's doing. And basically, what he's trying to show, from what I can tell from the PDFs and the questions and answers he engages with online, is this notion of tracing human ancestry through DNA. And he's proposing this model that aligns with his young Earth creationist perspective. So he basically attempts to reinterpret genetic evidence to fit the narrative that all humans are descended from a small group of people that lived only a few thousand years ago. Surprise, surprise, that's consistent with the young Earth creationist view. Now, obviously, anyone knows that proper, rigorous empirical science, you never start with a conclusion you want to reach and then write a load of guff in order to support it. You go where the evidence leads you, and of course, anyone with any scientific understanding knows that that's not where the evidence would lead you. But this is what Jeanson's done, and because he has a whole reservoir of credulous followers who want to believe in a young Earth, then they're lapping this stuff up and they're thinking, this is amazing. He's our new hero. He's the as I said, the poster boy of young Earth creationism. But just think about what's happening here for a second. Just try to have a more balanced, rational perspective here. Um, I mean, can you really imagine what the world would be like if somebody had actually used proper, rigorous scientific analysis to prove that all um, genetic lineage can trace back to humans dated just a few thousand years old? Now, imagine what that would do for world science. I mean, as any open-minded, rational, truth-seeking person would admit, if something that profound had happened to the scientific communities, then it would be earth-shattering. It would show everything that's wrong with our current models, with our current empirical evidence. Why isn't Jeanson making more of a splash? Why are all the peer review responses so negative about his work? I had a discussion with a guy called Herman Mays on my show a while back, and we had a really good conversation. He's a Christian. He supports evolution. He's a scientist, and we didn't give Jeanson too much of our conversation time, but we did speak a little bit about it, and he's probably done more than anyone to rebut this nonsense from Jeanson. So ask yourself what the world would really be like. Why isn't this guy? Why don't any of them go forward and claim, a Nobel Prize, or why don't they break tradition and have the whole scientific community, chasing their tails, trying to understand about this new scientific revelation, this enlightenment? Well, obviously, because none of it's true, none of it has any empirical weight at all. And this is the fundamental question. It's like, well, these guys must know that they are ostracized, that they're marginalized, that no one, apart from a few of their huckster followers, are taking them seriously. Jeanson, he his book is it's a farce. It explores, as I said, the human genetic lineages. Um, it focuses on Y chromosome and the mitochondrial DNA, and it tried to construct a history that he claims is consistent with I think he actually says the biblical account of Noah's descendants. Um, but he's basically trying to recalculate mutation rates to fit a young Earth model. Um, why would anybody do that? Does he really believe this stuff? When he uses selective data to fit a young Earth creationist narrative and knowingly ignores or dismisses the entirety of the scientific evidence and achievements of humankind for several hundred years. That's maybe, tens of thousands of scientists who've contributed to the enlightenment of humankind in numerous ways. When he just dismisses all that as though it's nothing, what does he really think about himself when he does this? How does he feel internally when he misinterprets the mutation rate, to support this young Earth? Not all species have the same mutation rates, obviously. You can't take one species and infer the entirety of the history of the planet without accounting for the diversity of mutation rates. Even mutation rates are a biological characteristic that evolve themselves over time. Some organisms have slightly different variations on, say, repair mechanisms or other traits that influence those mutation rates. Nuclear and mitochondrial genes have different mutation rates, for example, as Herman Mays pointed out when he had the discussion with them. Jeanson ignores all genetic diversity. He overlooks the extensive genetic diversity even in the human population. Um, this is this is deeply flawed and dishonest stuff. And when he critiqued my video, as I said, he selected a few things that he thought he could distort. And of course, the host that had him on to interview to be interviewed about my article, they didn't have the first clue about what they were talking about. This guy called Gwilym Davey, who lives in Norwich, and an assistant of his that I can't even remember the name of. They were absolutely ignorant to even the basics of science, and therefore they had no idea just how dishonest Jeanson was being. And this is what's happening with the young Earth creationists in America who follow this guy. They don't know what they don't know, and they believe that they're entitled to trust this man because they've been fed lies about you can only be a Christian if you happen to support a young Earth and a biblical, a hyper and ultra biblical literalism. And actually, as some friends earlier mentioned in a video I created earlier about them, ex-friends friends who've come out of young Earth creationism and have now seen the light and are Christians who accept evolution. They they explained, and quite understandably, that for many people who've never been exposed to any kind of truthful evidence about this, that they've never they've never known any different, apart from it's got to be Christianity and young Earth or nothing, or Christianity and evolution's false, or you don't have to be an atheist. Well, surprise, that is what's happening. A lot of people are falling away from the church, and they're coming into um, an atheistic belief because they can't square what the young Earth creationists were telling them with their faith anymore. So unfortunately, they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and they're rejecting Christ because they've been fed a pack of lies from the Bible Belt fundamentalists. Now, my question to Ken Ham, to Nathaniel Jeanson, to people who are willfully peddling this stuff in Answers in Genesis is, how does that make you feel? Is there not a part of you that deep down has a sense of doubt and shame? Do you really believe this stuff? Or are you just enjoying the attention, enjoying the money that's rolling in, enjoying the kudos that you would probably never get in any kind of merit-based arena? Maybe that's a disservice. Maybe you could have been something else and really thrived, but you are making a living. You're making a reputation from deceiving people, not just fellow Christians who have kind of relied on you to delegate some of the authority and certainly expect and deserve better. But the amount of people that this young Earth creationism has impacted in such a negative way that they have fallen away from the faith because they know that in their heart of hearts that what they've been told isn't true. And they think, well, how could I possibly trust what Christians say about the gospel, about their faith, if they're getting the basics of science so fundamentally wrong, and not just fundamentally wrong, but clearly, and I can't see any way that this isn't true, but clearly willfully lying and distorting the truth for their own gain. I've been trying to work this out about Nathaniel Jeanson because I've seen him in action a couple of times and I think actually that's probably why he won't debate with me. And I was told this by Herman Mays, because not only do Answers in Genesis tell him who he's allowed to have a discussion with, they kind of they they control what he's allowed to do, which of course is shocking and circumscribing and a real assault on one's intellectual freedom and the spirit of adventure. But I also think if you look at the two or three debates that he has been brave enough to have with people where he's been absolutely demolished, particularly Herman May's, at least once, possibly twice. I know I've definitely seen one. Um, he's probably not going to subject himself to that again because he'd rather hide in the enclave and just seek the adulation from the people who don't know better, which is the very opposite of good scientific credentials, and it's the very opposite of good scientific discourse and dialogue and empirical exploration. So, bearing all that in mind, you have to ask, what does it feel like being Ken Ham? What does it feel like being Nathanial Jeanson? When you go on to a debating program and you get humiliated, or at the very least, your pseudo-scientific dogma is torn to shreds by people who understand the subject properly. You know, Nathaniel Jeanson, as Herman May said in my discussion with him, he doesn't do any experimentation. He doesn't have a lab. He doesn't have any kind of peer-reviewed support. He doesn't have anything apart from some crass and misinformed manipulation of data, which is only going to be convincing and seductive to people who A, don't know what they're talking about, and B, have already been brought up into a world where this stuff has to be right for them. Otherwise, they're in big trouble. They're probably ostracized from their family, or they're neglected and disowned. We've seen stories of this so often in the communities in which I contribute and operate. So that's my thought on Nathaniel Jeanson, and I'm doing a kind of compendium of anti-YEC stuff, and I'm going to put it together in one blog, and I'm going to have lots of hyperlinks. So I want it to be but for me at least, my go-to place where if I want to share stuff, I will share this stuff, and it has all of the links to all of the articles, to the talks I've done, um, to everything that I've contributed to the subject, in order to hopefully, make it a portal into a way that we can encourage people to escape this stuff. And also, if I see Nathaniel Jeanson's posts, and if I see stuff on Answers in Genesis, then I'll probably, want to share that too, because someone's got to be telling these guys that there is an alternative and that they're being lied to, and that this is a very manipulative and arguably quite clever form of pseudoscience. It's that the ability to create something that sounds like science. It sounds like, and these guys practice it so well. You've seen the other guys like Grady McMurtry and John McKay and people like that. They're almost like stand-up comedians. Not that it's funny, obviously, but in the same way that they hone their material and they say it so often, and they have a stand-up comedians. They rehearse their routine so often. They have every kind of comeback to the hecklers. It's all very cultivated, and this is what these guys do when they do their talk. They turn up to debates where most of the audience are going to be young Earth creationists too, and already wanting to hear. They're already on the side of John McKay or Grady McMurtry and people like that before they even entered the building. And you'll have a minority of people on the fence, and maybe one or two dissenters who want to call these guys out. But so that's what Jeanson's doing, possibly at a more sophisticated level than the likes of Mackay and McMurtry. It's certainly more specialized. It sounds more specialized because it's about one very specific thing in the genetic landscape. But it's disgraceful. And how these guys can sleep at night knowing what they're doing. And they must they must have had enough feedback and enough criticism by now to stop, even internally, even in the quietude of their own living room or in bed, whatever, where they have their deepest thoughts, where they must think, nobody's on my side here. None of the scientific communities believe this stuff. My papers have been torn to shreds, figuratively, of course. And nobody's coming to me celebrating these achievements. I'm lying and I'm deceiving people who don't know any better. I don't believe for a second that you can actually have all this stuff going on in your life and not be deeply insecure and wounded and ashamed at that. In fact, that's one of the well-known psychological mechanisms of therapy, is that if you do harbor falsehoods and untruths that you know aren't, that you know you're not being authentic, and you know you're not being as truthful and as rational as you should be, you feel internally weak and disappointed with yourself. And there are two things that happen. One of two things: you either suppress that and you bury it further, and you just sort of regroup and come out even more in favor of the position you're trying to defend. Of course, as we said, there are lots of sunk cost to that. There's a reputational um, stuff at stake, particularly with someone like Ken Ham, who's got loads of books. He's got the Noah's Ark Museum and all this Answers in Genesis, the brand of Answers in Genesis. Nathanial Jeanson's married to his daughter, so he's probably terrified of upsetting his father-in-law and all this sort of stuff. There's a multitude of complex psychological barriers at play here. But I just wanted to expose this kind of stuff and maybe share it around if I see Jeanson trying to get away with it, because frankly, it's appalling and it's so damaging, especially given that it's under the rubric of a Christian faith that prides itself on truth and on authenticity and on representing God as best we can. We're all deeply flawed. We're all deeply sinful. It's by grace that we're saved. And thank God that we have enough grace in our favor to make us savable, if you like. Thank God that we have a Heavenly Father with such a capacious heart that He loves us enough to think that we're worth dying for. And how disgraceful to run an organization that actively disregards that, or at least a serious chunk of that, in order to pursue something that's so false, so manipulative, probably just because they quite like the money and the attention and the respect it seems to be bringing them from people that don't know any better. What's the value of respect and kudos and status when it's built on something so disingenuous? Thank you for watching.